time I look out at the new configuration of faces, I can think of that analogy of the spectacle of the magician and the spell that's been cast, and then the latecomer comes in and forget. Is the latecomer the one who neither sees the illusion nor believes in it? So that's the Arya, right?
Sashi Pukir Jushin Letotram Rira Minshin Indegyam Hadi Sange Shindu Mite Uvadi Drogun Nanda Shingla Jupasho Hiram Guru Ratmananda Kamdeyatayami Sange Shuram Soki Choknamba Janchu Vardu Dani Jasuchi Daki Chinye Give Sananki Rola and cheer Sange Drupasho Sange Shuram Soki Choknamba Chanchu Vardu Dani Kapsuchi Daki Chinye Give Sananki Rola and cheer Sange Druparsho Sange Chiram Soki Choknamba Janchu Vardu Dani Gyapsuchi Daki Chinye Give Sananki Rola and cheer Sange Druparsho
So try to think of relaxing into your meditation posture. It should actually be your place of greatest equilibrium and ease. If we had more space, I'd encourage you to take the Shavasana corpse pose, if that's better for you, and it's good to experiment with every possible pose to meditate until you find when you can let your own body be truly released into equilibrium so that your mind can be as clear and quiet as possible. Allow yourself this time to start at a broader level of awareness even than your own body. We've been so acutely aware of this room and the forces at work making this environment, this vessel for us. So allow yourself to experience the whole room as vibration, not just the physical wind that we can feel on our faces. The very atoms of the floor, the walls, cushions. Can you teach yourself to hear sounds and not even have to identify them as actions with labels and identities, but just a shape, a movement of a configuration of vibrations? And be at peace with that. And then gradually draw your range of awareness closer to that which you have labeled as me, my body. You can have a loose relationship with that label for now. Accept it as mere convention. But also try to see the range of sensations and movements within that field. Simply as that, without further identification. But paying close attention to what arises as it arises. release further and further into the out breath. Not holding anything back. As your outer body becomes more and more still, try to feel the subtler configurations of energy and movement, not necessarily associated with the breath this time. Just for a few minutes, look inside. Don't move anything. Don't disturb anything. If you can still see and connect with the blazing light with which you were blessed and permeated this morning, allow that to arise. If it's not so easy to connect with now, just try to be very, very quiet. Like a still pool of water. And then within that still pool, can you feel, detect the energy of wanting something? You might not even be able to identify what it is. Can you taste that sense, which is pretty much always with us? Wanting something we don't have. Whether it's a very, very pure thought or a pretty mundane thought. And now can you recall what it is you want to want? The energy of wanting is nearly always with us. But the picture of that which we, in our highest aspirations, feel most at peace wanting is not always clear. So can you call forth from your heart this raw energy, this surge, a clearer force of aspiration? Who it is you want to be. And notice, if you can, how that very thought might shift the flow of energy within you. And then, as though looking into the depths of a lake so deep you cannot see the bottom, try to imagine looking at all the causes that have ever made you what you are. Whether you see them in the form of seeds, potentials, simply try to imagine countless past actions, situations, experiences. Almost certainly we cannot see this, but we can get the feeling for it. And where in all those causes can you see the seed for your ultimate aspiration? You may see many, many different seeds, bringing you even to where you are now. to the very capacity to have the understanding and aspiration you have. But is there anything in you that could directly turn into an enlightened being? Or is it an absence? An absence of obstruction. An absence of any of those seeds being real. Who is it who knows? Is there an identity there? Or can you release into an awareness that is bereft of I? Can I imagine now that you've dwelt there for a long, long time? Utterly clear, lucid, vast awareness. As though you heard someone calling your name from far away. Can you taste how something might trigger you to start to think of the self again? What would come first? Do you feel a body? Is there a little shimmer of thought or memory, mental images, feelings? Can you sense how each of these parts are distinct from the word I? But is there an I of me somewhere else that's going to enter these parts? Or as images of thoughts, feelings, shape, the body arise, is there already a fixed sense of me tied up with each of them? If neither, then what does it mean to say I am? Can you feel the gravity of it? The way it can pull your mind and energy down. Into one or another concrete possibility. What if that I is simply a word? And if simply a word, where would you like to place it? With what would you like most to identify? Can you identify with your own lack of self-nature? Your own infinite possibility? So that the one who says I is simply the one who is aware of being empty. As you relax your energy and mind, very sensitive to what you perceive. And for those of you who are here this morning, how does it relate to the vast compassion that draws no boundaries? How is it that an I who is emptiness can love an all who is emptiness? I should say, as many of you may have noticed, there was no formal, perfect, or foolproof meditation on emptiness there. Carries a lot of elements of it, but I trust you to find and study those meditations separately. In particular, the Lamrim meditations on looking for a self and not finding one. I offer that more as a complement to this morning, tasting both the boundarylessness of self and that space and possibility for where we drop the label I. Because if we discover that the label I has no inherent attachment, no inherent relationship to any one of our heaps or all of them together, and or any possible version of our heaps that we've had from time to the beginning, then we can glimpse the possibility for validly labeling that I on something else. And as soon as we do that with knowledge, that plants a seed. And in a sense, we've been planting that seed every time we say I. But as long as we do it thinking that that I is real and is really what we associate it with, then that has its consequences, mostly problematic. But the more we understand that this labeling action is itself an action, is itself a seed, is itself, planting a seed, then we can do so more and more wisely. And actually, as we gain more and more space in our meditation and in our daily lives, realize that we have more choices. Who is it with whom I identify? And this is a huge part of devotional practices as well. It's the more vivid, like I've been trying to dance, not even trying, I've been trying to let it come, but as we dance with these different images of how the teacher appears, how the Buddha appears, how the highest embodiment of what we want to become appears, the more we open ourselves to letting that infiltrate us. Then from a different mode, as we do a meditation like this, realizing actually there's nothing else here that's inherently or necessarily going to be me. The more fully we can release into the embodiment of that teacher who embodies us, or becomes embodied in us. And that's a radical kind of Buddha devotion. And it is one of the fastest paths there are. But it requires the elements of really believing in who it is one calls upon. Because we can't have any doubts. If we're going to open ourselves that completely to be transformed, dare I say, it better be one who's worth being transformed into. And that's why sometimes the highest archetypes are helpful, even if they seem a little vague. Because it keeps us from reifying the qualities that we may see in a particular teacher, this teacher or that teacher. When the very karma of being in the human realm, as we were touching on yesterday, already limits our ability to meet fully embodied beings. We're saying this difference between what we can visualize and what we can actually meet. The Lamrim says that the karma of being in this realm will prevent us from seeing perfect beings until we're quite close to it ourselves. So we need the high archetypes of what an enlightened being is, what a divine being is. But then sometimes those tangible feelings of appreciation, devotion, gratitude, frustration come before the beings who've had a direct effect on us as fully embodied. And so by not reifying either one, being in that dance between the Guru as manifest and the enlightened being as unmanifest, but believing it's there, he, she is there. Then by the time you can call upon that being to utterly transform you, it can start to be in a place of faith without fear. So I actually gave you the meditation yesterday, a day early, on the decay of the world, turning all to the meditation technically is on, there's another version of it where you would see your own body decay and see yourself turn into a skeleton, or you would see fields covered with skeletons and corpses. The point now being simply a visualization of something that's not actually happening right now. And we know it is not actually happening right now. But that it transforms our mind. It has a very distinct effect on our mind. And as the next step in this series of arguments, trying to refine, I want to say, different levels of appearances. The dream appearance, the compromised faculty appearance, and here the visualization appearance. And our dear friend of the mind-only school is supposed to wonder, well, what about a case where everybody agrees there's no outer object? Such as this visualization where the meditator sees the whole world in a state of decay and the ground strewn with bones and carcasses, one's own body turned into a skeleton. How can such a clear appearance, and this is a very technical term, sel nang, selwa nangwa means to appear clearly or to appear luminously. This word selwa, which means both clear as in transparent and also luminous. And it's essential for gaining stable visualization on anything one wants to imagine in order to affect one's mind, that eventually the mind becomes so clear that then what appears in it, as I said before, the image of a Buddha, the image of the skeletons, either one, whether to develop renunciation or to develop devotion, that which is visualized, if one practices enough and the mind becomes stable enough, it should appear very vividly, clearly. But the mind-only school supposed interlocutor here is saying, well, if there's no mind there, in parentheses, freely established mind, how could it establish the clear appearance? Because we know the clear appearance isn't real. But Tsongkhapa interprets Chandikirti's response to this in exactly, to be precisely a response that comes back in the opposite direction, which is, it's through the process of meditating on something that's not real that we can see that all three poles of the perceptual triad are not arising through any nature of their own. Because, for example, in various sutras, it's specifically taught that one should contemplate what is wrong. And here, wrong in the sense of not real. Lokpa means not the way it is. So you contemplate what is not the case. That's really how I should have translated it. What is not the case. And then that's glossed as what is not reality as it is, which I could also have translated, what is not suchness. Suchness, the very beingness of reality. So you contemplate what is not the very beingness of reality in this concentration. The consciousness to which the skeletons appeared were established through its own nature. Then, as it appeared, so it should become. And that contemplation would become one that had reality as its objective field. So this again gives us a little further glimpse into what a mind established through its own characteristics would be like. It means anything any aspect that mind takes on would be reality. So that in this case, if the really good meditator was meditating on the skeletons, they'd open their eyes and the whole world would be covered with skeletons, and other people would have to see them. Once again, I should compare this to sort of the opposite case of what if you're meditating on a perfect world? And you've established, well, reality has no nature of its own. Therefore, I want to visualize this world in order to plant the seeds for it. But you so convinced yourself that if reality has no nature of its own, that therefore this world that you have seen in your meditation, it should be real. I think this is an important contemplation as how not to have false expectations for our meditation practice. Because we can actually believe things in meditation so much that we would almost wonder, well, if reality is empty, why hasn't this turned my reality into what I was visualizing instantaneously? Because there's no world out there, right? This is picking up right where we left off. And again, the opposite extreme of, it's very similar to the elephants waking up from the dream. Shouldn't the elephants be in your room? Shouldn't the bulls be in your room? Shouldn't skeletons be in the field if you've done your meditation right? And so the fact that they're obviously not, it's obviously not that way. And also when we meditate on pure worlds, it's obvious that that doesn't instantly transform our world. It's not as if all suffering ends. I think this is an important point to recognize, well, of course not. If it's true that sensory faculties and objective fields are different from just what's arising in mental awareness, and there is a difference between the form that is an appearance to mental awareness and the form that's the appearance to the physical senses, then it's no problem to have something in your meditation and something in your actual ripened world, shall we call it. So here, the absurd consequence is, well, if it were not like this, then, on the other hand, if you were to watch a theatrical performance, so here I mentioned before performances being one of our other analogies, so here's the performance. Then for all those who turn their eyes to that objective field, and here it just means that field, space in front of you, then just as a sensory mind, i.e. an eye consciousness with the aspect of that objective field will arise for one person, then in the same way, or in a similar aspect, it will also arise for all the other audience members. So, I mean, it's not that I'm I hope I'm not a spectacle, but insofar as there are many eyes looking at a relatively single thing here, we can say, okay, what is it? A sensory mind that is an eye consciousness with the aspect of that objective field, if it arises for you, so it arises for you, because I'm out here in that sense. But if anything that a definitively established mind thought up were therefore real, then likewise, exactly like the practitioner with a mind of repulsion, who is meditating on the skeletons, then for those who are not such practitioners, if anyone who wanted to see the skeletons as an objective field would just turn their mind toward the objective field seen by the practitioner, the yogi who's looking at them as skeletons, then they'll see skeletons. And it would be just like the consciousness of blue. I don't think I need to belabor this. I think we've got this now, right? So finally, we get to what I've kind of been building to as our climax. But we do need all this in place to understand Tsongkhapa's explanation of this. So here's the verse from Chandakirti, which is the foundation for our entire contemplation on the glass of empty liquid. In this case, though, it's not a glass of liquid. It's a river. It's interesting that the original reference is to a whole river. And it's Kirtan Vidargye, the later Gelugpa commentator, who changes it to a vessel of liquid. So here's Chandakirti's verse. The same as one with vision affected by cataracts. A craving spirit perceives a river of flowing water as pus. I'll say it again. The same as one with vision affected by cataracts. A craving spirit perceives a river of flowing water as pus. So basically, Chandakirti in that verse, and then he, in his auto commentary, comments on it, says, if you want to understand what happens when the craving spirit sees a river as flowing with pus and blood, just think about the cataracts. Is anybody comfortable with that? Not comfortable with that?
It sounds like the water is actually there.
Yeah. And what was the analogy of cataracts? Was that correct seeing? No. It's a problem. It's a impediment in the eye. So does this imply that karma, the craving spirit, is an impediment that makes them see weirdly? Yeah, it kind of sounds like that, right? Yeah. This is my setup, my 5-day setup.
None of us wanted to find it.
I just wanted you to really be uncomfortable with this verse from Chandakirti, because we've all studied this example, but I don't know how many of us have read that verse. So I won't keep you in suspense any longer. Here's the first thing. I actually, in my dissertation, ended up spending almost 100 pages to divide out what are 2 pages of Tsongkhapa's commentary on it, because it's so dense what he has to say. And he goes off script, as it were, because most of the time he follows Chandakirti's auto commentary, as I said, quite closely. Chandakirti has almost nothing to say about this verse. He just says you can explain it along the lines of the cataracts and so on, and other illusions. And Tsongkhapa jumps in. He's like, no, I want to explain this to you. And it's some of the most beautiful 2 pages of Tsongkhapa I've ever seen. So there's a reason it's at the center of our lineage. But as I say, what's in course 5 is actually from Kirtan Vidargye's more extensive commentary. Tsongkhapa only has, well, in a printed book, 2.5 pages on it. I won't give you all the commentary I wrote, but I will read you Tsongkhapa. So he says, you should also understand how to reply, as in this ongoing debate, by giving the example of illusions, which are the same as what is seen by someone whose vision is affected by cataracts, and with the example of an image in a mirror, and so on. So I promised you reflections. Now we have the image in the mirror. You should also understand, as explained previously, the case where a mind perceiving pus and blood arises for craving spirits in relation to a river of flowing water. And explained previously means in the way we've been talking about, you should understand this example. Because this example is from scripture. I mean, there are sutras that refer to the fact that one of the specific karmic ripenings for a craving spirit is that they see all bodies of water as flowing in pus and blood. So Tsongkhapa says, in this regard, the 5 types of form that belong to the sensory field of mental objects. So this, think dreams. Think what you hear in a dream, what you see in a dream, what you smell in a dream, what you taste in a dream, what you touch in a dream. The 5 types of form that belong to the sensory field of mental objects are not designated by those philosophical systems that assert functioning things. But they are mentioned in sutras, and we ourselves accept them as such. So you've heard about the functionalists, right, the Ngopomawa, and that's basically all schools up to the middle way. So including the mind-only school, where it says, if something functions, it has to have some nature of its own. And so it's interesting that the notion of a sound that appears only to the mental consciousness is not accepted by those lower schools. It's only the middle way that somehow sees the need to assert a specific type of form that appears only to mental consciousness, a specific type of sound that appears only to mental consciousness, in the way that we've just been talking about dreams, and tried to separate out that distinction. So Jitsu says, therefore, although there are no skeletons, they appear clearly, and we must accept them to possess form in the way that a reflected image does. But insofar as the skeletons only appear to the mental consciousness, they are not part of the sensory field of form in the way that a mirror image is. So he's first said they do possess form in the way that a reflected image does, i.e. an illusory image that is not what it appears to be. Skeletons are also illusory. But Jitsu Kappa is saying something Chandakirti never mentioned, is, but the skeletons can't be part of the sensory field of form in the way that the mirror image is. But since it also does not belong to any of the rest of the 9 physical sensory fields, and I had to figure, I'm pretty sure that I got that right, it's by saying 9, he means ear and sound, nose and smell, tongue and taste, body and touch, or the eyes themselves. That's what's left over, because there are those pairs. And so if he says 9, then it must mean out of 10, because he's ruled out the object of the eye consciousness. So since it does not belong to any of the rest of the 9 physical sensory fields, it arises as totally constructed form, belonging to the sensory field of mental objects. By totally constructed there, he's used that phrase earlier in the book, explicitly referring to, basically it's based upon the mental images one has of visual form, and then it gets kuntak, is the word there. It gets kuntakt, constructed into a mental image. So even there, he's acknowledging you can't have the form that appears only to the mental consciousness unless at some point you have the seeds of having seen visual form. Now we could debate that the blind person might not have in this lifetime and has it from previous lifetimes. But so what appears now, this is how in one paragraph Jitsu-Kappa covers all the examples. That's why we had to do it all. Then he says, what appears to the eye consciousness as a hair, and whenever you see that phrase, you know this referring to somebody with cataract seeing what appears as a hair. It doesn't just mean looking at my hair. So what appears to the eye consciousness as a hair, in the case of someone with cataracts, is like the reflected image, the sensory field of form. So it's not merely appearing to mental consciousness. And we, in a contemporary sense, would probably say, well, because there is physical stuff on your eyeball. That's why it's appearing there, because there's a conglomeration of extra cells on top of the eyeball that's creating that appearance of a hair. So he's not saying the hair, because there is no hair. There is no hair out there. But what appears to the eye consciousness as a hair is like the reflected image, a sensory field of form. It's illusory because it is not what it appears to be, but it, what is seen, is in the sensory field of form. When a river of water appears to a craving spirit as pus and blood, since it is an appearance to the eye consciousness, it must be set forth as the sensory field of form. So he's gotten as far as establishing that that pus and blood is, I don't want to say out there, but it is appearing to the eye faculty and the eye consciousness. It's not like the skeletons. It's not just a mere projection of your imagination. But he hasn't yet established it in such a way that we can say that the pus and blood is equally valid to the water. Don't worry, he will. But my own discomfort has been, does this imply that the human realm becomes the gold standard of reality, while the perceptions of beings from other realms, tormented or benefited by particularly strong karmic influences, will have misperceptions comparable to those of a human with faulty vision? Um, as the influence of individual karma then reduced to the status of a, quote, defect in the eye of the beholder. So that's what it sounds like he's saying. Karma is a defect in the eye of the beholder. But in thinking about it, obviously, as I say, the Jitsukapa goes on, and I've struggled with it. My sense is that if the analogy with the cataracts would seem to take us to those uncomfortable conclusions, given everything we know about the middle way, maybe it's because we're not yet understanding the cataracts in the way that Jitsukapa wants us to either. Like, to what extent, if everything is arising as an illusion, are the cataracts also just one more form of altered vision? Is that all he's saying? It's altered vision, but karma is always altered vision. And if you recall that he said when we wake from the sleep of ignorance, all the perceptual triads are going to disappear. So in that sense, in the consequence school, you can't establish the difference between correct deceptive reality and wrong deceptive reality. That's the same word, wrong, as in lokwa. Because both, from the perspective of ultimate reality, are equally incorrect. So Dzongpa has begun by distinguishing illusions such as those false images produced by cataracts from images. He's distinguishing illusions such as false images produced by cataracts from images such as reflections in a mirror. Both are illusory in that on closer examination they are not what they appear to be. But the way that each illusion comes about is different. He then compares both of those to the immediately preceding example of the visualized skeletons to show how such clear appearances to the mind are both like and unlike images seen in a mirror. He acknowledges that these functionalist positions don't separate out that category of form that appears only to the mental consciousness. From a mind-only school perspective, perhaps it should already be obvious why not, because for them, all form is only mental. You know? I won't belabor it. Still, Jitsukapa asserts that we ourselves in the middle way accept that such a category exists. So then these clear appearances are like the reflected image in that they appear to be real, but when you go to touch them, and this is for our visualized meditation object also, when you go to touch them, you won't actually find them. They'll turn out to be only an image. They are unlike the mirror image in that the reflection is still something that reaches one's eye consciousness via the eye faculty, and thus can be established as outer form, but the images of the visualized skeletons never reached one's eye consciousness at all, which is why you can meditate in a completely dark room or with your eyes closed. Or if you're totally blind, you can be a brilliant meditator. If you have those, I should say, if one has the seeds for those visual images to arise in this life. But can you already taste an answer to that previous question about the difference between perfectly stable visualization on a Buddha whose presence you believe is there, but if you reach out to touch it, there's no physical form there? The meditator might be able to have such stable meditation that they can move, they can even open their eyes, they see the visualized image, but they know there's nothing there being established in the visual field or the tactile field. As opposed to the reflection, where you go to touch it, you won't find it in the mirror, but the light is doing something. You know, even a rainbow, you might say, is closer to the reflected image in the mirror because the light is still doing something in a way that can be objectively observed, photographed, and so on. Whereas, no matter, unless we're clairvoyant, we can't see the visualization in somebody else's meditation. But notice how all of this is still forcing us into the difference between individual and collective worlds. So back to the cataracts. As I said, something is appearing to the eye faculty. It looks to the mind of the perceiver like a hair, but it is not really a hair. All the components for illusion are present. I'm sure you're familiar with that, but illusion is when the way something appears and the way it really exists don't match. And so a cataract is a perfect example of an illusion, and it comes up over and over again in scripture. On the other hand, it's not merely imagined like the skeletons. He wasn't saying karma is like a visualization of skeletons. Furthermore, and this to me is the key point about the analogy, there is something unique to the makeup of the living being doing the perceiving that makes that person see something others do not see. An inner force. And there's this word, inner force, in Tibetan, tu. And it's what Geshe Michael sometimes translates as mystic force. Because it's often used in not only tantric context, but also in, it can almost be like a sorcery or a spirit force. But I ended up in this work translating consistently as inner force because, and it could even be a ripened, like a force that has gained full power. A nuba, as we were talking about before, is a potential force. And a tu is a force that's reached its capacity. And so when it's used with karma, it means karma that is about to be manifest or is manifest. So for me, when I started to think about that, it was when it started to make the cataracts analogy clear. That something unique to the eye of the perceiver, not necessarily the defect part. Maybe the analogy doesn't go that far. Maybe we don't have to worry about the defect part in order to understand the analogy. Maybe we just have to understand the analogy insofar as we're not saying that karma is like visualized skeletons. It's not just something made up in your mind. It's not like reflected images in the mirror that won't function the way you think they will when you go out to touch them, because that pus and blood will function as pus and blood for the hungry ghost. I'm running out of analogies. But it is closer to the cataracts insofar there's an inner force unique to the perceiver that makes them see a basis, like a crack in the sink, as, like the sink, let's just say, like the sink, as having black lines in it. So then you could say the hungry ghost, the craving spirit, the inner force of karma is seeing this empty basis, i.e. like the empty sink, as pus and blood, whereas somebody who has a different inner force sees it as water. And so again, I really think that in order to understand this, we have to let go of the defect part. It's a defect insofar as everybody with karma has a defect toward reality as it is. Economy, suchness. So you could say that all karmic projections are like cataracts in our eyes. And that is, yeah, there are other examples where he says when the cataracts of ignorance are removed, then all the triads of sensory perception will disappear. And so from the perspective of somebody seeing emptiness directly, none of those triads exist. But in terms of comparing beings, it's not as though you can say, oh, this is the human without cataracts and this is the hungry ghost who has a defect. That's not the point. It may have been the point from the mind-only school point perspective, because they do end up implying, and this becomes clearer in Peter Dargy's commentary from other sources, that they do end up implying that the hungry ghost has a problem and the human is seeing it correctly. But what I would also offer as a warning to that analogy is that we can acknowledge within the human realm that the person with cataracts will not be able to find the hair they think they're seeing, and in that sense, it's closer to the reflection in the mirror. Because as they say in the, you can't comb that hair. You can't braid, if there are multiple, you can't braid it. It's not a hair. Whereas we know karma produces the fully functional object that do all the things, not always that we expect to do with them, but for the most part, functionality is still the result of the karmic dredging, so the human can drink the water and it can work. So then this next passage should be very familiar to you, but I need to read it so we're all literally on the same page. Tsongkhapa then actually quotes a Sangha summary of the Greater Way, this foundational mind-only text, in order to comment on Chandakirti, but he's now stepped away from Chandakirti's text and he ends up commenting on Master Sangha. It's very interesting, but he switches his source. And this is, insofar as for a craving spirit, an animal, a human, and a god, a single thing is, according to the members of each class, different in their minds, we assert that it is never established as an actual object. An actual object here would be outer object. If you read it in the mind-only school sense, would be almost like using this example as the reason you can't establish it as an outer object. The very fact of contradiction between realms, it would be like saying, insofar as humans see this as a pen and dog sees this as a chew toy, there's no pen, there's nothing out there. We can't establish outer objects. But then, is it clear to you now how quickly you could you switch into mind-only view and see, oh, inherently established mind with its own characteristics, producing consciousness, eye faculty, and appearance of object as pen, dog doing the whole thing with chew toy. Oh, they have separate foundation consciousnesses. Their worlds are actually established on distinct foundation consciousnesses. They're in different realms. They have to be able to interact somehow, but we have a really hard time saying how. I'm sorry that the terribly crass summary of mind-only school, but it is kind of what I've come to after a lot of work with it. But nothing compared to real scholars of the mind-only school, I mean. But on this point, in the summary of the Greater Way, this is just a copy saying, on this point, in the summary of the Greater Way, it was never explained clearly just what a single thing is. It's a rare time that Jetsakapa says something wasn't clear in a book of Sangha. It's never explained clearly just what a single thing is, nor what each of the individual modes of seeing is. So then he pulls in the Venerable Layman with his lifetime vows, his name is Upasaka Padadatta, has applied an explanation as follows, and this one should be familiar to you. By the power of the ripening of each of their individual karma, upon the single functioning thing, let's make this into a river of water now, upon the single functioning thing of a river of water, craving spirit sees it fills with pus and blood, and so forth. On the same thing, animals, such as a fish and so on, think of it as a home and live there. Humans will think of it as water, sweet, clear, and cool. They will wash with it, and drink it, and swim in it. Those gods who have entered into the meditative absorption of the sensory field of infinite space will see space, because they have utterly obliterated the ability to discern form. So this is what we started to say before. That even everything we said earlier today about the physical elements and shared worlds, where hardness is hard, and that somehow being on the basis of winds, it still takes karma to experience it that way. Because even the elements are empty of inherent nature. And so if there are beings in the formless realm who have surpassed the ability to, he says, obliterated the ability to discern form, they will not perceive even those elements. So you can't even say that winds are really there. Sorry. I'm glad that had an effect. If it hadn't, then we would have been missing each other somehow. I'll just offer this to you. I think I've probably said this before, but I mean, previous times I've been here because I love it so much. Because we have to think about that formless realm being in order not to get stuck on somehow atoms as a substrate. If we're try to imagine what is meant by the case of formless realm being who has obliterated the capacity to perceive form, imagine a neutrino had consciousness as it passed unobstructed through the earth and came out the other side unscathed. You know, you've all heard of this example, right? Insofar as, quote, from the neutrino's perspective, all that we humans currently conceptualize as form has virtually no effect on the neutrino. It may offer a rough analogy to what it would be like for a being whose mind could not only pass unobstructed through space, but had reached the point where it could not even conceptualize traveling in space or matter at all, i.e. a being in a formless realm with nothing to call a body. And the very names of the formless realm absorptions give you that sense. It's the meditation on infinite space, infinite consciousness. Then it's nothing at all, and then it's beyond conceptuality and non-conceptuality. I then went into a whole discussion of further mind-only school, but I'll spare you that for now. I'll continue with Jitsukapa since we have limited time. Now, in thinking about this, suppose you say, what those wanderers, i.e. central beings of different types, see is a conventional valid perception. If upon a single basis, those mutually incompatible things are established with a valid perception, it would be no contradiction for one thing to be both pus and blood and also not pus and blood. Is anybody comfortable with that? One thing is both pus and blood and not pus and blood. That's what it means to be empty, right?
That's what we're kind of taught, right?
Sorry?
It's kind of what we've been taught.
Well, one thing is both a pen and a chew toy. Yeah, you're good. You're good. I can't believe how many nods I got. I will read again. Now, in thinking about this, suppose you say, as a Jitsukapa saying, suppose you say, there's a hint in Tibetan. Let's see. No, he didn't give a kachik there. There's a hint in Tibetan. If you ever see kachik, it's almost certainly wrong. But he didn't give us one here. He just gave a if you think. Suppose you say. What those wanderers see is a conventional, valid perception. If upon a single basis, those mutually incompatible things are established with a valid perception, it would be no contradiction for one thing to be one thing. Muchik is the word which comes from the quotation. One thing to be both pus and blood and also not pus and blood. Then it would follow that there is no mental stability even toward that which is established with a valid perception. Now this term mental stability, yitten, literally means yi is one of the words for mind, as in the mental consciousness. And tembo is stable. Now the word as a phrase also means certainty. It means there's no certainty. But it's interesting to me that he used that word and not nyepa, which would be another way of saying you ascertain the fact of. Because tembo has to do with meditative stability also. So he implies your mind would always be wavering. Because if it's equally one thing and equally another, there's no certainty about anything. Like Buddhas aren't really Buddhas. Now, if you say one thing can be both validly perceived as this and validly perceived as that, then, oh, well, they're a Buddha for me, but no, they're not a Buddha for me. Buddhism is true over here. No, there are no Four Noble Truths over here. This religion is really true. No, this religion is not true. Things are empty. No, things aren't empty. You see, if you apply the idea that a valid perception isn't valid in some cases, then there's no certainty about anything, is what he's saying. So Jitsukapa says, if you understand the meaning of the scriptures in this way and set it forth like that, it will indeed turn out that a mind cannot be sure with regard to a valid perception. If you ask, well, since that is inappropriate, how does it work? Then this is the question of an inquisitive thinker. On the other hand, if with such an understanding you hold that, oh, this is its meaning, and you claim that there is no mental stability with regard to valid perceptions, then there will not be one person who can ever establish that I have realized the meaning of this object to be this. Since you would thus discount all valid perceptions, this is unreasonable in the extreme. That's Jason Kappa, not me. He continues. So if you do ask me how it works, to begin, I will give an example. Suppose someone touches a ball of steel that is blazing red as it burns with fire. But it is a person who possesses the knowledge mantra for overcoming conflagration. If this person picks up the ball of steel with his hand, the consciousness of the body will bear the tactile sensation of the iron. But for that person, the aspect of a tactile sensation that is extremely hot and burning will not arise. Notice how precise his language is. If this person picks up the ball of steel with his hand, the consciousness of the body will bear, it will possess the tactile sensation of the iron. I get that feeling of, slightly rough, there's a rough edge on a cannonball or a ball bearing or something like that. But for that person, the aspect of a tactile sensation that is extremely hot and burning will not arise. This is due to the condition of the hand being washed and so on by the water of reciting the knowledge mantra. But for someone who has not recited a knowledge mantra such as this, the sensation of the ball of iron will arise with an aspect that is extremely hot and burning. You might even say, put a thermometer next to it, it would register the heat. Thus, one must say that both the tactile sensation of burning and that of not burning are the way that a single ball of iron feels to the touch. But at the same time, there are two valid bodily consciousnesses. While the tactile sensation established by the one is not the sensation established by the other, one can still assert that both are valid perceptions. But it is not as though what is proven by one valid perception is disproven by the other. You get it? I mean, I don't expect you to get that the first time, because the difference to him, to Jitsukapa, is night and day between first saying two valid perceptions establish the same thing as two opposite things. And here he said, single ball of iron, single temperature. One hand, and I say, obviously, the example may seem obscure to us because you can't explain the bizarre by means of magical if we don't believe in knowledge mantras. But imagine you have an insulated glove. We can imagine that, right? We can imagine a glove that's very, very thin, so that you could still get the tactile sensation of the bumpiness of the iron, but it protects you from the heat. Maybe we don't have that technology that thin, but we can imagine it. So that's what supposedly this, the knowledge mantra that can change the person's ability to have certain tactile sensations when they touch something. So they've been washed in the knowledge mantra. So that's the magician's hand over here. Over here is the ordinary person's hand. Single ball, single heat reading. One receives perception, cool to the touch, but it's iron. One perceives perception, iron, hot and burning. You get it? There's one basis. The two perceptions are different, but they don't contradict each other. And we know that practically, that when the dog doesn't destroy the pen and just chews on it a bit, you can still pick it up and write with it. So the two perceptions of the one thing don't contradict each other.
Like that.
You don't like that? Well, Jitsukapa has more to say. He's really just going to give us another analogy, so we have to keep thinking. In a similar way, with respect to some basis, upon that basis, a stream of flowing water that basis of a stream of flowing water. One part of the river arises as pus and blood to craving spirits by the power of their previous karma. Another part of the river arises to humans as water to drink and wash with, but does not appear as pus or blood by the power of their previous karma. If this takes place, both of these parts are each parts of a single river. Therefore, the object established by the valid I consciousness of the craving spirit and the object established by the valid I consciousness of the human are two objects. But insofar as they are distinct functioning things, then of these two, how could the very same object that has been established through one valid perception then be established by another valid perception as its complete opposite? So in a sense, it's saying that the dog experiences a different object than the human does.
Both and neither. Both and neither.
It's this keyword parts, which may be familiar to you. This Kidderdargya picks up on it. I find it very interesting to compare these two passages, because what I just read to you, you've probably not seen before. Kidderdargya actually expands upon it to say one functions as the material cause, the other as the simultaneous condition, or the contributing condition, if you remember that. Tsongkhapa doesn't use that language. It's very interesting. And I don't know exactly where that language came from, whether that was an oral commentary that then Gyaltsab Je or Kidder Je used, and then it got through the next generation or so. Just a second. But all Tsongkhapa says, and to me this paragraph is, again, it's like this foundational paragraph to see how our whole ACI teaching is going to this key idea here that Tsongkhapa has given after one of his rarer moments of scolding his audience, as though he'd heard in the various monasteries he'd been in some various explanations of this situation that he wasn't satisfied with. What was your point?
Would you say that, are you saying that each object is separate but the basis is the same? Is that the point that's being made?
The point that's being made is that there is a single basis, but each being perceives a different part of it. And we don't mean as in right side, left side part.
Two separate objects.
Um,
Same basis.
For me,
Yeah.
I think we had a phone conversation about this like years ago, before I read any of this. It's more like that quantum thing of a probability field. I think that would help us better. In our day and age, we can relate to that, whether we're quantum physicists or not. We can relate to the idea of a probability field where it's not actualized as one thing or another until the interaction with the perceptual consciousness has occurred. And so that river, you might say, is a river of potentiality, which can still validly be labeled as a single basis. But due to what the later commentator called the contributing condition of the craving spirit's karma, it's perceived as pus and blood, and due to the human's contributing condition of karma, it's perceived as water, and all the things that those things can function as. And remember, Kidderdargya then elaborated that to be, once the one being has partaken of their part, that part ceases to exist for the others. But if one thinks too hard about what those parts consist of prior to perception, I think we get messed up. And I actually did manage to ask this a couple different geshes in Tibetan about, can you establish that basis? And at one point I said, but what about the wet and flowing? And the answer I got was, oh no, well, wet and flowing is a definition, and for somebody who doesn't understand the meaning of definition, and he gave me the phrase for a Datangi Kibu, a child who is trained in the term. So he was saying the craving spirit wouldn't be trained in the term, and I realized I don't have the Tibetan to explain to you that that's not what I meant. I meant the basis. But I got one clear answer about it would still be the shared karma that establishes it as liquid. And for the formless realm being, there wouldn't be liquid there. That's why that one is so key. because you can say, oh, the liquid arises as water arises as pus and blood. But we know very well, from our point of view, the chemical composition of water is vastly different from the chemical composition of pus and blood. So you can't even say that there's a liquid there that's one thing. So basis is tricky. It's very tricky. And I will dare to say from some other, again, conversations, reading, thinking, you can't establish the basis. You'll never be able to establish what that basis is. But you have to posit it in order not to make ridicule of the idea of valid perception. I didn't know if you wanted to say something.
Sure, I'll say something. So for me, when they use the example of liquid, and they say, you know, if there are beings from 3 different realms there would be 3 parts as a basis for each one. And if there are beings from 2 realms there, then there would be 2 parts as a basis for each one. There's one being from 1 realm there, and then it's just one basis, 1 part. And so how is one thing, glass or glass of water, liquid or river, or whatever it is, how does one thing express itself as either 1 part or 2 parts or 3 parts or any number of parts? How can one object be all of those different things? How can one basis be all of those different things, right? So to me, the sort of the I don't know, the helpful aspect of this is really as an emptiness meditation, and it's, you know, almost in the tradition of the Zen koan to kind of try to have the mind apprehend the nature of reality and the basis of what is there. When one is sitting down and trying to think about it or look at it or meditate upon it, and we conventionally do this and perceive things, we're thinking in a very sort of human, structured, concrete fashion. This is this, this is this, this is not this, this is not that. However, when you're meditating on emptiness or ultimate reality, it's outside of those constructs. And so if one is doing this type of analysis, for me, it's very helpful to bring the mind from ordinary human thinking about definite bright line constructs, and to shift the mind from that way of looking at the world and that way of thinking of the world, and to shift the mind to a different way of relating to the basis of what's there. And so for me, that line of reasoning and that analysis is very much a tool to shift the way in which I'm relating to things, shift the way in which I'm relating to the basis of projection, and shift the way in which my mind is functioning so that it's not so rooted in ordinary human perception, and to shift my mind much more into a space of non-conceptual reality and understanding emptiness. And it relates to what you said earlier, which is releasing the coarser conceptual minds. So as we release the coarser conceptual minds, which are dualistic and which are saying this is red, this is blue, this is 1, 2, 3, and as those minds in meditation, as we still the mind, and as the mind becomes more subtle, and as we stop relying on the coarser functioning minds, and as we rely on the more subtle minds to function, it becomes easier and easier to relate to this analysis and this meditation, because the more subtly functioning minds are much more able to stop concretizing, stop dualistically defining, and the subtler functioning minds are much more able to understand sort of a higher basis of stuff and how things might exist without all of the sort of concrete projections that we're so used to. So that would be my 2 cents on that.
Yeah. I don't have anything more to say. I'll just continue reading to the comment.
Eva, I have a question. If the basis is positive, isn't there a subtle assertion of self-existence?
No, I mean, this is Jitsu Kappa after all, so I'll trust him that he wasn't asserting self-existence, and it is almost the last book he wrote in 1418, so this is not anything immature coming out of him. Let me just read the end of the passage and we'll see if we can get any further in it. So he says, the thing about the parts, but I'm suggesting these are metaphysical parts. These are quantum parts. These are not as in cookie cutter sections, as you're saying. Well, the deeper the mind can go to subtler layers of perception, even we are capable of seeing a single thing according to different perceptual faculties. And as we move down through those subtler and subtler minds, as we were trying to taste earlier today, we can pick up on how even a single being, depending on which karmas are asserting themselves or which levels of mind influenced by different layers of karma are asserting themselves, we can start to taste those different levels of reality. And I think this may be part of what you're getting at also, is this doesn't seem like an abstract story anymore, when we can see how one thing can arise as two quite different things for us in the course of hours, in the course of days. And actually there's elements of Vajrayana practice that becomes essential for, to be able to see, oh, I changed my perceptual faculty, not just like the visualized skeletons trying to imagine something different, but actually going through ritual. And that's why it's so interesting to me that he invokes the knowledge mantra, which he considered to be part of shared reality up to bed at that time. Probably that's why I use this thermodynamic love analogy, because he didn't see that as some high exalted realization. It was just part of normal magic that you could do. But if a single person can go through those different layers of experience on a day-to-day basis and almost be able to witness the power of ritual to shift reality, then, as you say, this doesn't seem so abstract. So we've said one part arises as flesh and blood. Another part arises to humans as water, by the power of their previous karma. But if this takes place, both of these parts are each parts of a single river. Therefore, the object established by the valid eye consciousness of the craving spirit and the object established by the valid eye consciousness of the human are two objects. The pen is not the true toy, even though the basis is one. But insofar as they are distinct functioning things, then of these two, how could the very same object that has been established through one valid perception be established by another as its complete opposite? So he's saying in this case they wouldn't contradict, because it's the perceptions that are two, it's not the object that is two. And then he quotes Arya Nagarjuna, the friendly letter, Surleka, to craving spirits in the springtime, even the moon is hot, and in the winter, even the sun is cold. So it's a similar authoritative example. To craving spirits in the springtime, the moon comes down as if it was the sun, and in the winter, even the sun is cold. Now for craving spirits, by the power of past karma, and he's explaining this now, even the springtime moonlight has a sensation of being extremely hot. And during the winter, even the sensation of sunlight arises as something cold. Notice how it's not saying the moon it's not saying the sun becomes cold. It's saying the sensation upon that being's skin arises as something cold. This is not contradictory to the fact that for humans, on the basis of the light of the moon and the sun, respectively, a sensation arises in the aspect of cold or warm, respectively. Because with respect to these two, it is not as though the very same tactile sensation that is to be apprehended by one valid perception as hot is then apprehended by another as something cold. It's almost like the individuality of each person's sensation is so unique to them. It's not, my sensation can't contradict your sensation. But two radically different sensations can arise in respect to a single object. That's what he's saying. And that's why we're not getting into anything self-existent. Because we almost don't have to say anything about the basis. The basis is emptiness, ultimately. The basis is empty. It might be vibration, it might be river, it might be space out there. It's something that can be agreed upon mutually. He says there's also no contradiction because both are posited as the tactile sensations of the light of a single moon or sun perspective. Since it states a single thing, you might get your hopes up with a rough understanding that has not intimately examined the meaning of the scripture. But I beg you, do not be satisfied with a premature conclusion. Again, it's so complex, it's not me. I did my best to translate. So as I say, I don't think you can ever establish a basis. But we have to posit it conventionally in order to continue to fathom what a conventional valid perception is. I think we need to take a break, but try to make it quick, and then we'll just do another 20, 30 minutes or so. Yeah. Somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes, please. Thank you.
David, what are your questions?
Sure.
Sure.
Can I just be quiet for a second?
Yeah.
Is it okay if I did this?
Sure, if you just want to.
This process is something that is 5 minutes ago.
Well, it's understanding direction and information.
Yeah, it's just like a coach has to say, focus on agreeing with you, but okay.
Well, to the extent one overlay is awareness that there is outside of our perception, and then it's more process. So on the one hand, it's like a positive good, and the other talking about what is this down the hall.
Yeah, do that. Is which is I have it in my phone. That's what this quote by Margaret Juna says: "Dependent origination is emptiness, and emptiness is dependent origination." And if you say we can simplify it,
Well, yeah,
I'm just saying.
So you have the issue of the English translator. You know, say emptiness is actually, so there's
You know, let me get the quote out here.
I'm kind of talking around the idea of this, there's a relationship between the two and the similarity.
With the quote, you get to translate what it is, and maybe next reputation. But I'm gonna let her that question. How do you translate this?
Well, yeah, that would
be
good. I mean, yeah, of course, that's a great relation to me. What I heard is kind of full that's the same point, right? That's all. It's a privacy. So it's that to me that feels sort of wrapping all of this through this safe. But what the collaboration on that statement, commentary on those statements, right? I'm not sure if the intent of the awesome I say they're exactly equivalent to their analogies, very synonymous or most popular. Should I get stuck if I say that? I'm not a scholar. I'm not a scholar. I tell you what, better doesn't know because all these minds talk about what one would get how meditating. stuff is helping at that level, and it was better understanding. So like, there's meditative, and that helps you sort of clear, and you do, yeah, and then you go deeper in meditation, and then you understand the deeper intellectual stuff. And then that helps you progress further, you just continue like that, so we need, if we're trying to sort of, use elements to define philosophical distinction, it's only useful at whatever level I'm actually meditating. That's a meeting with Phil, is that non-conceptual, visual, awareness of what it is, what that realization is. All the language and all the words that help sort of place the mind in approximate preposition to experience it.
She coming back this way, she's just gonna stop.
But also, in which links, it's applications without knowing the application, not aware of the applications, that leads to sometimes, which is just an elaboration. So if understanding of this, even as a gradual process, lessons the actual understanding like problems. I was creating lessons. Apply not.
Brandon, there's also some behind the desk. Yeah, sure. There's behind the desk too. You can take those two if you want. Yeah.
This is what's so
I just sit there, my mind goes, and it's just,
That's what I'm doing.
It's so hard to get you can get, right?
Someone they don't know what gets
if they can tell them something, that I want that they can buy from me, they're happy.
Right.
No,
And my mind just is blank, and I'll just say, I need a shirt, what kind of shirt? Green shirt, polo shirt. But that is, but if you don't have that, then it's just an intellectual.
Well, and so, that's daily sort of awareness of what am I very happy. And a lot of that is projecting. Because we're interested in else.
And I hope that comes across some of that.
Practice is, powerful. You have to see that.
No worries. Oh, really?
I'll sit there and
think about it.
So.
It's actually not really. It's all.
I'm doing.
That was just my little.
Yeah,
So I
It can be hard for us. Almost. I think that's
Probably.
I mean,
and then you have getting the kind of power over that power. And
holding something, you just walk in that way.
That's what that was.
okay, everybody can start to mosey back to their seats.
One day, I'll sit down. So I'm gonna wait for the next time.
That's what I thought too.
Yes.
Okay, I can feel us reaching our denouement.
Denouement.
Everybody knows that word, right?
What's the Sanskrit for that?
I heard a couple no's.
Yeah, I don't.
Tell us.
Oh, denouement. The aftermath of the climax. So I think our climax was probably somewhere around 2:30ish, 2:20. No, 1:20, 1:30 for our break. Sorry to those who weren't here, but you can watch later. And so now we're like cleaning up the pieces. I mean, we were in a big mess yesterday afternoon, right? As Geshe Tubin-Rinchen, one of Holy Geshe Michael's great teachers at Sarah, who actually paid me great kindness in leading me to the Vajrayana teacher whom I studied with. He used to say that when he was teaching on what became course 15. He said, let's open that box. We'll open that box and make a big mess, and then we'll put it all back. So we made a big mess yesterday. I hope it's starting to feel like we're put back together again. So I don't have too much more to say about this because I know this example is familiar, so I just wanted you to be able to taste it in the context of all these examples. And so just to tie it back to the cataract analogy. Tsakapa has explained it in terms of still what are very outer things, like a knowledge mantra, or we might say a thermally resistant glove. And then he's explained the actual example in terms of parts. But these examples point to what it would mean for a purely inner factor, namely the influence of a karmic tendency to govern the way that something will be perceived. We still haven't figured out how karma affects perception. Like, we can talk about subtle winds. It doesn't actually tell us anything more about the mysteries of, that's why it's cool. That's why it's mysterious power of karma. The mystic power of karma that transforms perceptual faculty into something that will perceive it in a certain way. And that is what becomes valid perception. At one point, and I'm keeping in mind Geshe Rinpoche's teaching, going into depths of the mind-only school we haven't even touched here. I don't know exactly what it was. He was speaking about like a Nampa, the sort of aspect that the mind-only school says that your kunta, your construct, actually puts on top of dependent things, so that you're never seeing the actual dependent thing, but it's this like a film that is what you perceive. Film not as in movie, but as in a film that goes over things. And in a certain sense, it's that which is said to be mind only. Those are the vijnaptis, those are the cognitions through which one sees the dependent things which the ignorant or conceptual mind will never be able to touch directly. But then Geshe Rinpoche compared that briefly to the Dunchi, or the abstraction. What I have been translating as abstraction, what Geshe Michael also calls mental image, which is much more helpful to us. I just, for academic purposes, I had to use something a little more technical. But the mental image, which is an unchanging thing that appears to us. And strangely, at that moment, Geshe Rinpoche said that's quite a bit more coarse. As in gross, that the Dunchi is this very almost like cookie cutter, pen, food, good, bad, like these are those unchanging mental images through which we see the world, pot, etc. Whereas the construct at that level, the mind-only school, is a, I dare say, a changing thing. Yeah, I think at that level it is a changing thing, that's what you're perceiving, but you're not perceiving it. I'm a little nervous that I made a mistake there, but
Repeat that, please.
what I'm messing up. What I'm referring to something I'm not very clear about in order to make a different point. So please don't pay too much attention to what I'm referring to here.
Which do you pay attention to?
You have
The kuntak or the dunchi or the changing kuntak?
What I am now doubting is whether there was another layer between the kuntak and the dependent thing that was changing, but is not yet the conceptual construct. That's what I'm having a doubt about. And it's a whole other topic, and we just leave it for now. The point is different. Yeah, the point is different. The point is different.
We're on the denouement.
We'll talk about it later. It's the difference between a hologram and an abstraction. I'll use just different language now so we avoid the technicality problem. Between a numpa, and this I feel more confident using this word, a numpa is an aspect. So the aspect of the thing that we're seeing, and that does move and change, but it's not the real thing that the mind-only school is somehow positing is there. Dunchi being a kind of coarse mental image. The point that I brought up, and this is the only reason I brought it up, is that Geshe Michael at that moment, and this was his commentary as he was translating for Geshe Rinpoche, said, oh yeah, but in the mind-only school, the karma is the thing. The karma is the thing. And that stuck with me for a long time through all of this work. not even to think of it as the karma makes us project a certain version of something that's out there. Tsongkhapa here is clearly saying by the power of karma, you have a certain perception. But insofar as for us, we don't have anything but our perceptions. What arises for us as the things we think are there, the karma is the thing. And so I encourage you to taste it that way. Almost at the moment when you're ready, like me, to say, wait, I think I got that wrong, let it go. But then to say, okay, in the end, I don't have to worry about what the basis is, because I know I'm not going to find it. But the karmic propensities, as Tsongkhapa here has explicitly said, by the power of karma, you perceive what you perceive. What I was suggesting before about the collective karma producing the very elements themselves, it's not only the dunshi that karma produces. Dunshi as the mental image or the abstraction of the thing. Because for myself, I've run into a big problem because dunshis are unchanging. You can't explain the entire world in terms of unchanging things. Unchanging things only make sense in relation to the changing things that they describe. So you can't say that mind is simply a series of mental images that are unchanging, because you'd either run into the problem of them all being discrete moments that how did they ever connect? Or you end up saying, well, that's just a mental, what if I have non-conceptual meditation? What kind of mind do I have then? The mind-only school does give us the possibility for understanding how karmic seeds produce the changing, and this is why I'm hesitant to use the word construct. The karma creates these nampa, these aspects of the things we see. They create the dependent things themselves in the mind-only school. So in middle way, to say karma is the thing. The karma is the entire perception of the thing that we have access to. And so I think in light of what Tsongkhapa said in the previous paragraphs that I read to you before, we can all somehow partake of a potential shared world. But as long as we are limited to our individual perspectives, all we will ever perceive is that which our karma is not just projecting, but creating. And I'm feeling more and more comfortable with this word, creating. Because to say projecting still almost sparks of there being a world out there that we're projecting onto. But if it's truly a blank screen that's not even a screen, it's a blank emptiness, then the feeling of the hot to the touch for the person with that kind of hand and the feeling of the cold to the touch for the person with that kind of hand, that's the whole of their experience. So I will just read you my own reflection here, which is, this is one sense in which the action of karma can be likened to the presence of cataracts in someone's eyes. Due to what is a distinctly personal condition, the outer world appears differently. The effects of karma in general would be considered much greater and more far-reaching, but the effect of karma in general would be considered much greater and more far-reaching than the effect of the cataracts in a specific case. Because a person with cataracts can still easily discover that he or she is wrong, there are no functional hairs, that my vision is blurry, and so on. You know, people can realize, oh, something's wrong with me, I better go to a doctor. So they can be deemed invalid in a conventional sense. But according to many Buddhist scriptural descriptions of the lives of certain types of craving spirits, when they take up the bloody pus to drink, it actually functions as something disgusting and toxic, not as water. We humans know very well how water functions and that it is not the same as a mirage. Yet what if, when drinking a glass of water, we could become aware that it is only due to karmic tendencies, namely internal conditions, that it is arising as clear, cool water for us, and not to do to anything that could be established inherently from the side of the, quote, liquid. If there's nothing there that couldn't also be pus and blood, at that moment I propose we would have tasted the indivisibility of dependent arising and emptiness in some form. Because if you literally taste, there is nothing here that could not be for someone else at this very moment pus and blood. You cancel the thinking it's out there. You cancel the thinking it's inherent. You cancel thinking it has any qualities of its own. I guess I'm excited about this because I'm trying to offer you, after all our struggle with what does it mean for the mind to create the world, and all the problems if you somehow try to divorce that from an interactional reality, and yet you can splash this over the face of multiple beings who are here, and they all experience something incompatible with each other on a single basis. And I will dare to say, then you see the emptiness of the basis. Because if it's two things that, if you compare them to each other, would seem to be incompatible, like the sun being hot and cold for two different beings at the same time, there's nothing in the sun that is hot or cold. That's what it says. There's nothing in the sun that is hot or cold. There's nothing in the moon that is hot or cold. There's nothing in water that is cool and clear. There's nothing in food that is nourishing. There's nothing in medicine that can cure you. There's nothing in a pen that can write. You see how it all unfolds then? But when you get there, having thought of all those other things, you won't then say, but I have a mind that's really creating my world. That's somehow going to bump up against your world. Our worlds don't bump up against each other if we really understand what it means for things to have no inherent properties. Because then the basis, as you ask, is emptiness. And there's no bumping up, there's just whoosh, whoosh. We can pass through each other's worlds when we're not holding anything out there as really there. And we're not holding anything in here as really here either. Because then on the other hand, you have to be able to say the very consciousness, the tongue consciousness that's experiencing that pleasurable sensation is arising, yes, in reaction to the water. This is the key. If you need all three members of the triad, if the tongue consciousness won't arise unless something hit the tongue faculty, but the very thing, the part of reality that will be perceived by the tongue faculty, the object, came about the way it did by the mystic power of karma, then karma created the object. This is what I am daring to interpret Jethakapa as saying. Karma created the yul, the object, the objective field, that then the faculty was there to experience, and the consciousness was there to perceive. And in that sense, everything we perceive is unique to us. Because the person next to us, once the part reaches them, it's a different part. So we're literally partaking of reality. And we don't have to argue about what's there, because we'll never find it, and there's no established basis. So it has struck me at numerous times that Jethro Kappa, as I said, uses this word established through characteristics of its own, not established through characteristics of its own, over and over and over again, and he almost never explains what it means. He almost never gives you a definition of what existing by definition would mean. And yet right here in this analysis is where I think we have the best glimpse of what he thought it would mean. If things had characteristics of their own, then this wouldn't work. But if the liquid, the river, doesn't have any characteristics of its own, then this example can work and people can have valid perceptions and they don't contradict each other. So I'm not sure there's much more I can say about that except to love you with it and pour it out of my heart and say, please understand it better than I do. There was another thought there. It disappeared. Yeah. So then this is an extrapolation that also happened for me with this idea, which is the river is a chulung in Tibetan, but you can also use the word yun for a stream, which is very close to the word yu as in a mind stream. And sometimes you can say sem yun as in the stream of the mind, literally, and sem yu, which is a little bit more like the continuum of the mind. And then there was a point later in the text where or maybe it was earlier in the text, but I saw the word chulung, which really means river, used in reference to the mind. And it set me off thinking about how could this example actually not be about pus and blood and water at all. It's about the empty river of our minds, where we say the potentials don't have inherent natures, but you can still merely label the mind as a stream, karmic potentials. And sort of relating it back to the last meditation we did, you look at your own mind stream. It doesn't have any inherent characteristics of being this or that. At any given moment, the stream of our own mind could be read differently, could be interpreted differently. So when we got down into that difficult reflexive problem of how do you look at the emptiness of karma itself without then using the word karma, which doesn't, you can't define the thing by the same word. You can't use the word in the definition of the thing. It's very hard to look at the emptiness of karma and still use the word karma in our explanation of the emptiness. But, once again, I'll turn back on myself. Can you see the karma that makes you read the karma of your mind differently? Because this is the whole path. You plant seeds to have the karma to read your own past karma differently, and that's how you transform it. This is not the first time I've said this. This is what we've been leading up to all day and with the meditation and so on. But I'm just I want you to be able to think of it as concretely as that empty river. That there's no pus and blood there, and there's no water there, and there's no empty space there either. I mean, for a being who can't conceptualize space, you can't even say there's location. That's how deep the creativity of mind goes. And it says mind creates all three worlds. It creates the space in the three worlds too. But if we can look at our mind as this empty river that has no nature, for any one of us, what could that be? And it's I'll admit it's excruciating sometimes to glimpse the emptiness of your own mind. Because we do have to let go of actually wanting to be who we think we are in order to even open the space to plant the seeds, because it's not going to happen instantaneously. We know that either, also. But every 5 minutes, every split second that we can drop into a meditation where we no longer hold to ourselves as what we thought my karma is forcing me to be, we plant the energy. In that case, I almost want to use the word potential or tendency, fragrance, to push us into a different dimension. And as Master John was referring to before, the subtler and subtler levels of mind at which we can do that meditation, the possibilities for it become more manifest or obvious. So we're not holding on to this surface conceptual image of what I am and what my karma is. So related to the original question of what kind of mind is creating the universe, I think in terms of our discussion of very subtle mind earlier this afternoon, I went beyond what I can even say confidently, so that's there. But I will again suggest that idea that if there were a mind that could see its own emptiness directly, and not simply do so from the perspective of a conditioned consciousness, So this is a whole other issue, which I'll just say briefly. In the sutra system, even when one reaches shamatha, even when one potentially sees emptiness directly, it's still with the stream of consciousness that was projected into this life, because that consciousness hasn't necessarily dissolved into the indestructible drop. This is a question that remains a question for me, but I've gained enough clues so far to suggest that even seeing emptiness directly from a sutra point of view, of course the winds would be deeply gathered in the heart, but not necessarily completely dissolved into the indestructible drop in the sense of making manifest the extremely subtle winds in mind. Otherwise, there'd be no difference between Sutra and Tantra. Because what is so specific to making manifest the mind of clear light, as it's called in the Vajrayana context, are all these practices to dissolve the winds into the central channel, and particularly the indestructible drop. So if it's this mind of clear light that is said to be the foundation of samsara and nirvana, it's that extremely subtle mind of clear light that is the foundation of the mind of Vajradhara, the Buddha. Whereas, as Geshe Michael has clearly said a number of times, when you come out of the direct perception of emptiness in a sutra context, you know that your mind was not that emptiness. You are the mind of a sentient being. What you saw was ultimate reality. He said that many times, right? Whereas from a Vajrayana point of view, when you make manifest the extremely subtle mind of clear light, as Kappa clearly says on a number of occasions, you can designate both the mind of clear light and the emptiness that is seen by that mind by the same word. They are, yes, like water poured into water, as in the sutra teachings. There's something about that extremely subtle state of mind that is so much further along the path by the time it realizes emptiness. There's not much point in me saying this right now, because I can't give you any practices for it. I don't know how to even talk about it. But to just hold the seed of believing that such a mind exists, and that such a mind is the foundation for the possibility of our own existence. Because as I said, we can't see into that drop, but it is always seeing. And to know that there could be a mind that is always already present, creating a totally pure world. It's a kind of refuge. I mean, it's a way of thinking about refuge. That we don't even have to identify with our conditioned consciousness as what it is, as what it appears to be. Because if we don't hold on even to that consciousness as being real, we don't even have to identify with it. And so not only in understanding the emptiness of our own minds as being this or that, but identifying the emptiness of the very quality of consciousness as being something that exists at a coarse level versus a subtle or an extremely subtle level. How else to say it? To try playing, dancing with the possibility that at any given moment, our worlds could be created from that level of consciousness and not by our karmic consciousness, and how utterly our world would change if we could access it. So that the world created by Vajradhara and the world created by our conditioned consciousness are not two different places. That's what I'm trying to say. But we can't get there by imagining it. We have to get there through realization. But as we know, just even trying to think that way plants extraordinary seeds. Oh, and this is then, yeah, the nature of illusion. When illusion is not even based on all these analogies at the mind level, but it's about the way the extremely subtle winds of mind are manifesting after you come out of the clear light, or even an approximation of that clear light. Jezakaba says repeatedly in those Grace Majid's Okrim texts, somebody who's not at that level yet can't even imagine this, can't even comprehend what the body of illusion means. And all those analogies we used in the sutra system for rainbows and reflections, dewdrops and all the rest, we didn't get into that as much as I thought, but you get the picture. It won't get you here. I mean, it might get you here gradually, but you won't be able to understand the body of illusion in the sense of what's almost a Sambhogakaya Buddha on the basis of those analogies. Because there's something about extremely subtle winds and the movement of winds in and out of the channels and drops that will so shift your reality. When you see the world arising from winds, see the world arising from mind, illusion takes on a whole other meaning. And so I just have to leave you with that seed, that we do this preparation, we do this mind work in order to take us to a totally different place. So there's a path here. Have fun. I just really want to extend my deep thanks to all of you, and in particular to Stephen and Hector and Miriam, who had to leave, for specifically getting me here, and to Master John for hosting me and sort of having brought me in to teach at this rituals so many various times in the past. And so I deeply, deeply thank all of you for pushing me to teach. And as most of you know, I'm going into retreat now. And there's maybe it feels awkward saying this in public, but I need to. I've come to a place in my own path where it's vividly obvious that the most important thing to do is to be meditating. Like, you see how much I love to talk about these things and share these things, and how many thousands and thousands of hours I've put into translating and writing. And then it reaches a point where you realize, unless I've realized something, I can't communicate it. And you see my own insecurities and limitations in being able to understand, much less communicate. And so I ask your blessing and your prayers to be able to persevere properly in retreat and stay steady. And I wholeheartedly offer you my prayer, which is how vivid. Talk about a seed. Like, we are all united now, quite distinctly, all of our hearts. And I want you to be able to think of that, if you ever need the thought, okay, I am in that cabin there, I am meditating, and I'm holding you and your intentions and whatever you may need. And hey, that's how we work together, right? because we're not separate. And so our practice can support each other. So thank you for your practice and your dedication and your clear thinking and determination. So it's really, really good. I don't know if we should offer one now or...
Can you send us the link so that we can support you on your retreat?
Okay, so yeah, I guess I'll just do this orally. It's pretty easy since you've all seen my name. So I have a website, evanatanya.com, where I explain a little bit about the retreat, and if anyone wants to donate there, it's a pretty easy system, I think. Via PayPal, there's also a GoFundMe page, which I think is linked at the website now, if you prefer. And if anyone, I should say this, I'm happy to give all of you my email, but let's do it after the video's over so that I have business cards and stuff like that. So if you want to email me, and we can work out stuff with some.
I have the link from your email from the last